Okie dokie, good morning everybody. So welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee held on the 27th of March. So my name is Councillor Jamie Mulhall. I'm a councillor for Oakwood, so I'm the Vice Chair of this committee. So apologies from Councillor Morgan McGeehan, he can't make it today, who is our normal chair. So you're stuck with me for the next couple of hours. So hopefully we'll have a good session this morning. Just before we get cracking, I'd just like to welcome, I do believe it's Leah Parsons, who's going to be our new external auditor. So welcome, Leah. Looking forward to working with you for the next couple of months, I think. Right, shall we get started? So any apologies? Thank you very much.
We also have apologies for Councillor Sandhu. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Late items to be introduced by the chair. I have no late items. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No, are we all good? Okie dokie, fantastic. Minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January. Is everybody happy with the minutes? Are they a true and accurate reflection? Brilliant, awesome. Second down, yeah, cool. Cheers, Councillor. Right, thank you very much. Right.
There were one or two minor typo things which I've told to Dominic.
Oh, have you told Dom already?
Dom has already dealt with those already. They're only minor ones.
Brilliant, awesome. Thank you very much, Philip. Right, okie dokie. So let's go on to item number 5, which is the Audit and Governance Committee outstanding resolutions. Any comments from anybody? Yes. Oh, can I just ask that when you speak first time, can you just introduce yourself? Brilliant.
Thank you, Chair. So Paul Stone, Co-op member. Just a couple of quick questions. Firstly, on the counter-fraud annual report, do we have a time frame on that? There's a comment that says that we're still awaiting details on e-learning packages. And similar question as well on the Ulster Hall and Golf Course. Again, the comment doesn't give a time frame on that, so I just wondered if we got an update on that.
Okie dokie. Do we have any time frames, Richard?
I can pick that one on the first one. On the counter-fraud one, we're still trying to find what's going to be the best solution. It's not affecting the counter-fraud annual report itself. Yeah. It's just whether we've got any e-learning packages that are available. If not, we may have to look to write our own or something like that. So it's the cost really element of it and trying to find that. So that's the only one I can comment on. While I'm speaking, Chair, I'd like to just update you on the one as well on the 6th of December internal audit progress report about the email from the Chair to the directors and heads of service about the, should we say, inactivity and not always getting back to internal audit in time. Alton and I have drafted an email for him, sent it to him. He's come back with a couple of alternatives. We've gone back to him again and said which one of those alternatives we like, and so he'll be sending that out in due course.
Any other comments from anybody else? Okie dokie, awesome. Right, in that case, we will move on to the update from external audit. However, our external auditors are not here and not present. So does anybody have any comments which they wish to share or?
Thank you. So, yeah, unfortunately, EY aren't here today. We are having selective engagement with our auditors on the 3 outstanding sets of accounts. It appears that their attention at the moment is around the value for money judgment on the 22-23 accounts, and I have spoken to Hassan and Adil, who are our auditors from EY at the beginning of this week around that piece of work, but we're not seeing any progress on the actual auditing of the statements. We have also met with Mazars this week around progress for Mazars to pick that work up and what that implication means, and I've got every confidence that Mazars will start the work. We've already agreed a timeline. They're coming in the summer and starting that work. So unfortunately, I think we are at the end of the line with EY in terms of being able to get those accounts signed off, and we'll be obviously what happens in that in terms of any disclaimers that are given against those accounts. We've spoken to with Mazars around the implications of that. So it's just really, really unfortunate, but we are progressing, and I've got absolute confidence that this audit committee will be seeing some real good interaction with our external auditors, with our new appointed external auditors, as we move into the next part of that contract.
Cheers for the update, Alison. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think probably just to put it on the record that I think EY's performance has left a lot to be desired, to put it politely, I think. Anything from anybody else? Yes, we'll go to Councillor Kerr and then I'll come to you, Mr. Sunderland.
Just 2 points. I just thought it would be useful to have an update as to how many other councils or public bodies are in a similar position to ourselves regarding past accounts. And secondly, I wondered if our new team might like to say a little bit to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kerr. So I think off the top of my head, I think it's nearly 200 councils are in the same position as us. Could you give a bit more information?
There's a significant amount, yes. Seems to be some audit firms are completing more than other audit firms, would be what I would say.
I think off the top of my head, Councillor Kerr, I think it was 188, but obviously double check that. Philip.
I think what Alison just said, it's unfortunate, is the master understatements regarding to EY. And I think the activity, or perhaps lack of activity is a better way to describe it, from them is shoddy, at best extremely unprofessional. And I think that we have scope for, because inevitably they'll come to us in some stage and ask for some extra money, and I've no doubt whatever. I'm fairly clear on what my response would be. But I think we have a scope for complaining about them to, if not their internal procedures, their professional body, because they've not turned up to meetings. Meetings were reorganised, dates of meetings were reorganised to fit in with their programme. They've not turned up to any meetings. They've not sent any documentation of any kind whatever. They seem to be delaying audits for trivial matters. This issue about £1,000 in the Derby City Homes accounts, you know, is minimal by anybody's accounts. And there's a whole raft of issues which they have not acted upon. And quite frankly, it's totally unprofessional. I don't know how Alison feels about this, but I think the committee should be considering whether we want to professionally complain about them to the professional institute, or the way they have acted or not acted. Obviously, this is EY we're talking about. We're not talking about Mazars. So, you know, we'll wait and see what Mazars do. So, no disrespect. So that's my main point, I think. There are also proposals to change the way in which we reset audits. Do you want to talk about that at some stage, Alison?
Oh, Alison, can you just put your microphone on? Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether Mazars want to just pick up in terms of that, in terms of what that means with our programme as well.
Yeah.
That might be better.
There are some proposals from the centre about resetting, reorganising audits and things, and to get around this backlog of outstanding opinions it was 918 on the 30th of September, and it's down to 771 by the end of the year, apparently, according to a report I've just seen from Derbyshire County Council. But it's a significant figure in anybody's book. So, you know, first of all, I think it's the professional attitude of EY, or lack of professional attitude, and we ought to seriously consider whether we wish to complain about them to the professional institute.
Okay, thank you, Philip, for that input. What do we think? I mean, Alison, is that something that we think could be beneficial? I'm also thinking as well, just on a secondary point as well, is there a way of almost sort of capturing lessons learned from this whole debacle about how to make sure that we don't end up in this situation again? I know it's a bit difficult, but is there something we can potentially do on those 2 points?
I'm happy to support Philip's, you know, the committee, if the committee want that in terms of you know, some reflections back and, you know, a more formal response back to the to the organisation, because I don't disagree with what's been said. In terms of lessons learned, I think it's really difficult because most of it's been out of our control. We've engaged, we've produced our accounts on time. It's not been through lack of trying to engage from our perspective. So I'm really struggling as to see what we could do with that, but happy to support a more formal response going back to the body.
So as a committee, just one second, Councillor Wright, are we happy, and don't worry, Councillor Bolton, I haven't forgotten, we're still carrying on with the same conversation. Are we happy to put in a formal complaint about EY's performance as a committee?
Can I just clarify that
Councillor Bolton, we're carrying on with the same conversation. I know that you've got another question you want to come in on, but once this conversation's over, I'll come to you next.
And in terms of, I think, writing formally to EY to say that we've not been happy, and then it means that we can fall back, depending on what their response is. I think it's only fair to let them give us a formal response first. And if we're not happy with that response, then we can go further.
Cheers, Lisa, thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Bolton, Blaegreaves Ward. Sorry, I just think we'd indicated to speak. Councillor Kerr just puts her hands up and instantly speaks. What is the point of having a system if it's not made respectful to everybody?
Okay, point taken.
I'm sorry, but... Right, I'll calm down. I want to support what Philip said, because I know we have spoken out of the meeting, Philip and I've spoken to Alison independently as well about the situation of Ernst & Young. And I don't think they have done a service to this council whatsoever. And this is a serious issue in my view, and I really wanted to support that we do make a complaint. I think we should do. It's the right thing to do. If we'd received a lack of service like this from anybody else, we would make a complaint. And of course, individually, if we don't receive a service that we feel we should do, then certainly as an individual we would make complaints. I don't think we should let this slide, Chair. I really think, we should let them know our views, because the way we were treated was not good in my view. But thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton. Mr Webster.
Thank you. David Webster, co-opted member. On the same sort of subject, I remember back in the December meeting, I think the last time they were here, they were hoping to get the accounts finished by the end of March, and obviously that's not happened. The other thing to note is one of the things that they said at that time was that they were waiting for guidance from DLUC, central government. That consultation has taken place, and DLUC are now suggesting a backstop of the 30th of September for the old accounts. So there's a danger that we may be waiting another 6 months, although they also said that firms will be expected to complete as much as possible ahead of that time. So yeah, again, I'm supporting the complaint, but making that point as well. If it doesn't progress, we may be waiting another 6 months.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, Councillor Chaddison East. Yeah, just building on David's point. We've sat here when they have actually attended and fed back, so they're more than aware of our dissatisfaction with their service to us. So my view would be that we actually write to whoever oversees them and then copies Ernest Younging, because they are not unaware that we are dissatisfied with their service. My only other point would be, are there any contractual issues in relation to failing to provide the service that we might want to inform them of as well? And I really think it ought to come from either the chair of this committee or, somebody with the... Yeah. Thank you.
On the contractual point, I don't know, Alison, are they in breach of anything?
I don't think so. The other option is to go through the PSA, who actually appoint the auditors. So I think it's probably just a bit of reflection on myself in terms of what the best route might be. And obviously I'll speak to the chair and yourself around how we do that. But give a commitment that we'll escalate it through the most appropriate routes.
Cheers, Alison. Thank you. So I think we are looking at probably doing some form of recommendation to that the chair of this committee inputs a formal complaint to EY about their performance. So do I have a proposer and seconder? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Kerr. Thank you very much. Okie dokie, right, well, that was an interesting discussion. So we will, any other comments on this particular item? We're happy to, oh, yes, go on, Alison.
I just wondered if it would be appropriate at this point just to bring Leah in, just to give audit committee a little bit of confidence around what the audit plan will be looking at for the forthcoming year.
Yeah,
if that's
brilliant.
okay.
That's right. Not to put you on the spot or anything, Leah, but please do introduce yourself. Just press the microphone button. There we go.
So just to introduce yourself, I'm Leah Parsons. Been working with Mazars for 7 years now, and I'm a senior manager with the firm. And then just to put forward that we will be coming to every meeting that you have, and the next meeting we are planning on bringing a progress report just so we can give you an update on sort of where we are at that stage and sort of timelines for going forwards. We obviously are still waiting for further clarification on some details of the backstop. Obviously we know it's September, but we don't have all the details over sort of how we're going to treat opening balances and things, but we are going to sort of commence with our planning work as soon as we can, so that we can sort of get the ball rolling and obviously sort of bring back some assurance to yourselves over the accounts. And I think we're planning on having like a private meeting with councillors before the next meeting, so obviously happy to take any of your questions that you may have for us then. And we are always available through either email or if you want to give us a call over anything that's sort of going on. So I think we're really starting to put forward dates in terms of like July for starting the walkthroughs and sort of our early planning work, with then a view to sort of seeing exactly what's going to happen from September onwards.
Brilliant. That's thank you for that introduction, Leah. You're cooking with gas already. I'm chuffed to bits with everything you've just said. Yes, Mr. Stone.
Chair, if I just may very quickly say that in my current role, I work with Mazars, I work with Leah, and I've worked with Mazars at previous organisations, so just to give my fellow members here some assurance that the communication with Mazars has always been really strong, and I think that's really important, and they've always made themselves available to attend committee meetings, and obviously that's been a downfall, I think, with EY, is what I'm picking up on, so I just want to make that point.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Leah. Much appreciated. Yes.
Just to add what she just said, there are proposals for addressing the audit backlog, which has come out from the centre about resetting the position, recovery and reform. That's three phases they've got. I won't go into details because it's quite complicated about what's going to happen when and what's going to happen to things. So they will be looking at the sort of opinions that people will give on accounts, whether they are restricted opinions or limited opinions and various things. So there are details proposals up for resetting the position, and it's over a period of, well, up to 2027, 28, would you believe? So it does go over a number of years. So, you know, there are proposals for reform, which the phase is called reform, and as I read it, there aren't really any firm proposals at this point in time. There are some ideas, something called the Audit Reporting and Governance Authority being set up, which sounds to me a bit like an audit commission with a different guise. But you know, so there are proposals for resetting it. It's quite complicated, and perhaps at some stage we would need to receive a report going into details about it. I just happened to have come across a report actually in the Derbyshire County Council Audit Committee, which goes into this detail, but it was only a matter of last week, so it's very, very, very raw in the sense, and it's very limited what they've put in there. So that's just for information, really.
Thank you very much, Philip. Any other comments? Okay, brilliant. Let's move on then to item number 7, which is on Section 106 agreements. So Paul Clark, Head of Planning, I think is here to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. Paul Clark, Chief Planning Officer. Section 106 is the mechanism we use to help mitigate the impact of a development scheme, a development proposal, usually housing schemes. Hopefully the report gives you a flavour of the Section 106 procedures. It's a policy base. It's governed by national and local planning policies. A lot of Section 106, and Rosie's with me today, is involved with the negotiation with the developers based on their viability. They claim they can't pay, we claim you can, and their viability is assessed, their full viability appraisal is assessed by the district valuer as an independent assessor. The DV advises us what they can afford to pay, and then that is negotiated how they pay that and when they pay that. What we also offer is a monitoring process, so the monies we do get out of a development scheme, we monitor those payments that are allocated to various departments, off the top of my head, education, leisure, highways, etc. So the report gives you a good flavour of what we do and why we do it. It's obviously much more complex, as several members will know, than the pages before you. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we'll go to Councillor Bolton and then to Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Jamie. Councillor Sarah Bolton, Councillor for Blakery's ward. Yeah, thanks, Paul. As you know, from sitting on the planning committee, I am aware of the Section 106 agreements and how on some occasions they can be quite complex and quite, in fact, I think in my time, they've taken years to put together, depending on the size of the development we're talking about. So I know the complexities of dealing with such documents. But I think one thing I wanted to raise, councillors will be aware that we do get updates on Section 106 agreements if they are affected in the ward that we represent. And sometimes I find them quite misleading because a development can be in another ward in the city, but the money can be spent elsewhere. And I think that's where sometimes some complexities and some complications can unfortunately be raised. So I think to be open and transparent, so councillors are aware of where the money is spent, it would be useful if we know where the development is, what ward it is, but then where the money is going to be spent. And as I said, it's not always in the ward where the development is. And I think that's where there are sometimes difficulties in understanding why the money has been spent where it has been, when it's not directly near the site involved. So whilst I know the complexities, I understand it, and I thank the officers for their time, I just think a final tweak on the report that gets sent to councillors, I think would make it far more easily to understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really welcome the opportunity to discuss this in this meeting. The reason I raised it originally was I was a bit frustrated about how it impacted on my ward, and particularly when we've got quite large commercial developments on the ward, has very little impact on the actual ward itself, more on the infrastructure. I've subsequently been informed that that's the way that these were negotiated. Secondly, how other authorities interact, you know, when there's developments around Derby, it's my understanding that although the impact is largely, although the houses might not be built in our area, the Section 106 funding goes to support developments in surrounding authorities. Now, that's probably an issue that, you know, I was hoping when we had this discussion, we might be able to invite somebody from central government, from levelling up to actually to hear our concerns. So the first issue is, I'm really glad that we were able to discuss it. What I was hoping for, though, was that I was hoping to get some feedback how it's working. So, you know, for example, a lot of Section 106 is designed to support for affordable housing, which we're all aware we're acutely short of. You know, how is it actually working for Derby City Council? You know, is that funding being translated into affordable housing? Is it being spent appropriately? I was hoping, you know, a bit of data on the issue. I also wanted to link it to other items on the agenda because later we're going to discuss in the remit of this committee, and I think it's within our remit to actually ask these questions on Section 106. And also, one of the other issues is how the feedback from committee members, and one of the things is lack of senior officers here. So I'm really pleased you're here to actually answer these questions or put into them. In terms of the actual paper itself, it's my understanding that it's not a bill anymore, it's Act of Parliament. So this is Parliament's decision how we actually take level up and regeneration. And it seemed to be the paper is basically saying this is all up for grabs. And that's not my understanding, it's an Act of Parliament, so we really should be progressing it. And that leads me, one of the issues that it's quite rightly indicated in the paper is that it probably is going to take quite a long time to move to this new system. And, you know, I'm speaking from a very personal perception of how it impacts on my ward, but I suspect that other councillors, I know other councillors, have had similar concerns, a lack of, you know, it is complicated, but are concerned about actually how it does work. And there's an opportunity to be a test and learn authority in the implementation of this Act. And it seems to me, reading the legislation, that this new infrastructure levy is an opportunity to move away from Section 106 and then I think it's called the community levy as well, and move to this new infrastructure levy. And I know the feedback's going to be, well, we're not sure how it's going to work, how it's going to pan out, but surely being part of test and learn gives us an opportunity to not only understand it better for our own benefit, but also, potentially generate some support and maybe funding from the government to actually take it forward. So they would be my issues. Thank you.
Paul, is there anything you want to pick up from that Councillor Wright's just mentioned?
Thank you, Chair. I think there are probably 3, maybe 4 issues. Adjoining authorities, we do get involved in the negotiations to mitigate the impact on Derby. I'm thinking specifically South Derbyshire, where we put forward our requirements, but they are the determining body, and they hold the money that they secure, a bit like they do with the county council and county highways. But we get a drawdown as and when those developments progress. Council is correct. It is an act. It's the Planning Act and the Planning Compensation Act. That is what we're working with at the moment. We had a choice given to us by that Act to go down the SIL, Community Infrastructure Levy procedure. And some authorities did. We have taken 2 opportunities to test the viability of our sites. So the sites that are in Derby, we've tested the viability of them against the SIL regulations and found that we would get more money from developers using Section 106. SIL is a blanket approach across the city, where Section 106 is our bespoke to each development scheme. For instance, a development scheme in Alistry, for instance, would give you potentially more Section 106 money than a scheme in another part of the city because it's more viable. SIL is a blanket approach and tends to take the lowest common denominator. So we've stayed away from SIL. Government are proposing new legislation to come in to challenge Section 106, to move away from Section 106, to have this blanket approach across the city. However, that's the public version. My understanding is that they are losing the will, and we may still end up with Section 106. I would prefer Section 106 because it's a site-by-site basis, worked out on the requirements and costs of developing each site. In terms of how it's working, Rosie, I think it's working really well, but...
Yeah, I mean, Rosie Watson, implementation team leader under Paul in planning. and my team negotiate all the Section 106s. I've always been a big fan of Section 106. I think it gives us the flexibility to secure what's right from that development. So there's a lot of developments in the city, and particularly in the city centre, where there isn't the viability within the development to provide any or only a few of the contributions that we're actually asking for. But with Section 106, we can tailor it. So as Paul has alluded to with SIL, and we think also with the scant details we've got of the infrastructure levy, we will have to use this sort of lowest common denominator approach to understanding the viability, which is we can't stop development coming forward. We can't set the levy at a level where development doesn't come forward, because obviously we need growth within the city. So if it has to be viable for the least viable developments in the city, you are going to lose out. So one of the biggest concerns about both the community infrastructure levy and the infrastructure levy that is being proposed is that we will not in any way secure as much as we do through Section 106, because we won't be able to capture the value on those really high value developments. And I think it is quite interesting how the infrastructure levy has developed as from sort of first concept to there was a consultation about this time last year. And when it first came out, it was, right, this is a blanket levy, we're getting rid of Section 106, we're not having it at all. And then as we came to the consultation last March, suddenly there was, oh, actually, we are going to have to retain Section 106, because how do we get on-site affordable housing? How do we get on-site primary schools? How do we deal with those real complex issues that we deal with in 106? And you can't do it under a levy. So already, even in quite a short period of time, the government has dialed back on this sort of, successive governments have always wanted this really easy, simple, transparent process to capture sort of part of the development value to mitigate the impacts of development. But unfortunately, development economics and planning is not that simple. And so they always start with this grand idea of, yes, it'll be really simple and transparent, and then as time goes on, you have to add in these layers of complexity to actually make it work and to make sure that development is mitigating its impacts. So then you end up with all these compromises, and then you end up with a very complex system. So it will be interesting to see how that goes. Our view has always been that the test and learn, I think, is very telling, because we don't have the details of how it's going to work. And so the government said, OK, we'll do a test and learn approach. We'll have a handful of authorities and we'll work it through, and over a 10-year period, we'll get everybody signed up to it. But I think that those test and learn authorities are going to really have a tough time in terms of having to implement a system where the questions haven't been answered, while also still negotiating Section 106. So from a local authority resource point of view, that does create some concerns for me. Does that cover?
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Wright, is your comment relating to, because I've got Councillor Wilson that wants to come in next, but if your question is relating to all of that, go for it.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, I was referring to the new Act, the Levelling Up Act, not the previous Act, which came into law recently. It's referred in the paper as a bill. So that was just point of clarification. And I do take your point, from your perspective, obviously Section 106, that's not the perception I get from other councillors. So there's obviously either some miscommunication. That's why I was really keen. We actually saw the data. So, so we, if it is a misconception, it's all working swimmingly, then, congratulations. But certainly I don't feel that's the case. So, there's obviously a lack of communication to council. I do get your monitoring report, but that doesn't give that the type of information. It really is, are the funds being spent?
Councillor Wright, just very, very quickly, it might be beneficial if you kind of explain how, as you see it, what some of the key issues are, and if you could give an example of something maybe you've experienced as a councillor in Chaddesden East. It might be beneficial for not just everybody in this room, but people watching at home as well, who maybe don't know a great deal about Section 106.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very brief. Two issues, really. From a Chaddesden East perspective, highly residential area, not a lot of availability of planning space. So when you really look at what the opportunities are to benefit from Section 106 in the future, very, very limited. So how does that, you know, enable an established residential community to benefit from developments across the city would be the first issue. But it has got commercial land, very big commercial land that's been heavily developed. But most of the Section 106 money is allocated to infrastructure, which has very little impact on local communities. So they're the frustrations for me. And I do accept the position, well, that's the way it works at the moment. So my point is, this new Act gives us an opportunity to change things, how things could work in the future.
Rosie, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. So I think there's two main points there. So in terms of the sort of data of what we've spent, we were required by the government to submit in December, at the end of December every year, an infrastructure funding statement. And that includes everything we have spent in the last year, everything we still have to spend. Quite a lot of sort of raw data goes into that. So that is available on our website for you to have a look at. But I mean, we can send it out to all the members of the committee. Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great.
So that will have been uploaded in December 2023, will have been the most recent one. So that's where all that sort of information is. The information we send out quarterly is about what money we've still got in. It doesn't do the historical spend. It's about what money we've got in and asking councillors for priorities or ideas of either what an officer is proposing or what they might have an idea of what they might have spent. In terms of the other issue, I think this is more a sort of fundamental issue of the sort of the mismatch between what we can do with Section 106 and what its purpose is, and perhaps what people would like us to do, officers and councillors would like us to do in terms of improvements to the city, and they don't really match, unfortunately. Section 106 isn't designed as a pot of money to do what we want with. It is specifically and only about mitigating the impacts of development. So if you are an area that doesn't have a lot of development within it, you aren't going to have Section 106 money to spend because there are no impacts to mitigate. Now, and sort of taking that point and also the point that Councillor Bolton made earlier in terms of sort of ward boundaries, it is quite complicated because, as I say, it's all about mitigating the impacts of development. Now, those impacts can be very, very local to the development site, or they could be halfway across the city. So if you've got something like primary education or amenity green space, and usually some highways contributions, they will be spent very local to the development site. So chances are, if it's secured in a ward, it will probably be spent in a ward, but it might be over a ward boundary. But then if you have things like maybe community centres or sports facilities, they have, you know, citywide major open space, citywide catchment areas. So you could have a swimming pool contribution collected in one side of the city, which is then gone and spent in more ways. So it's not always easy to see. Now, I know that our reports are set out as ward-based because we were asked to do that so that it was easier for members to look. But we've always said, but do look at everything, because just because it's in an adjacent ward doesn't mean that you couldn't have an idea for a project to spend it on. It is all about looking at what is the wording in the individual agreement, which we include within that document. What are the parameters for spend? What's the time for spend? And because they're in legal agreements, we have to spend it within that. And if we don't, we have to pay it back. So I absolutely understand the point that you're making, and I can see that it does sometimes perhaps feel a bit unfair that some wards probably get a lot of money and others don't, but it all has to come back to that mitigating the impacts of the development. Thank you.
Okie dokie, thank you very much. You've been waiting patiently. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just picking up from Councillor Bolton's point about the report, whether maybe get feedback from members, because I personally would find it better to have the report reviewed to make it more, I think, user-friendly. Sort of whether you can incorporate some kind of RAG rating as well in it, whether things are delayed, because I think at the moment you've just got proposed or allocated, haven't you, in the columns, and also add an additional column to say this money's, for example, in my ward in Chadderston North, obviously this funding which is in Oakwood, which is allocated to Chadstone North, it might be worth just having an extra column just to say this is a ward, which is, so it's easier to identify. Yeah, I was wondering if maybe go out to members and just see whether, if their views on whether how that quarterly report can be improved.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can have a look at it. It's a report we've had for absolutely donkey's years, yeah. And I think perhaps, you know, taking a fresh set of eyes at it and seeing what might still work and what might not, and what might make it easier, because, you know, at the end of the day, the point of the report is to get your views. We want members to be involved in those decisions about how we're spending the money. And so, yeah, absolutely. One of the people that work in the team, Rachel Reid, mainly deals with the monitoring side. So I'll have a chat with her and we'll try and get something out to members to try and get some feedback on what changes might be useful, yeah.
Brilliant, awesome. Councillor Kerr, and then I'll come to you, Ms Webster.
My apologies, I didn't say earlier that I'm Lucy Kerr, I'm Little Over ward. The Little Over is an area which has had quite a lot of Section 106 and probably is going to have more, because it's an area with active and quite large housing developments going on it. But one of the issues that we've had in that situation is where what has been written as an expected Section 106, actually, by the time it comes to spend it, which can be 5 years, 10 years down the line, no longer meets what the requirements are. That we've learned more about what's needed, and, for example, building a park and ride based adjacent to the Royal Derby Hospital is not what we now want to do, because there is enough congestion in that area, and we don't want any more cars to go there. So we've got a pot of money that's no longer relevant for that. And there are other examples across the city where what had been formally agreed is not what will now best mitigate the continuing development. And I think there is a piece of work to be done there, probably with developers as well as internally, as to how we should manage those situations, and for developers to understand that we can make a best guess at what is going to be the impact of their development, but it won't necessarily, a few years down the line, actually be exactly what. And we need to somehow build in a bit more flexibility, which I hope we can do within that legislation. There have been several comments about the input from members, and I think that that is something where there is still scope for doing more. That we tend to, we get the list of planning applications each week, and it used to be formatted so that at the very end you would get the Section 106 agreements applications, and there might be none, or there might be 2 or 3. And that would, therefore, you would have to plough down to the bottom of the list to be able to know if any of those were likely to be relevant to your ward or you had an interest in. And that's now put as a highlighter at the end of a ward by ward list, which is a different way of looking at it. But how many people actually respond when they see something like that? I don't think it's many of us, because it's quite difficult to think, oh, well, if this planning application goes through and it's not going to be decided for another 6 months, and what do I think the impact of that would be? It's quite non-specific. And I think the time when we actually have some opinion on that is when that decision has been taken and we've got a heads of terms starting to be looked at. And it's at that point, I think, that members would be most effective at saying this is likely to be a priority, or to hear the comments from officers as to what their initial thoughts are on those heads of terms. And I think if we put in a bit more councillor comment at that point, I think we would feel more engaged with the process and do a better job of representing our areas. This next comment comes from a recent site visit where we have been told that there's no value to be made on this development, and therefore there is no prospect of Section 106, whether that's for education or for transport or for affordable housing or anything else, because the viability of that site. However, the viability of that site is very dependent on the negotiated value of the land. And if the landowner says, I'm not going to sell you this money for this land for less than millions, and the developer says, well, I can actually develop for millions, but I can't actually give you, the council, any money towards the impact of that, we've got no comeback. And maybe the landowner should be saying, actually, we should be able to say to the landowner, you can only ask millions for that, and not millions, because we want some money left to actually mitigate what is going on that site. And that is something which we can't do at the moment, and it's something which maybe future legislation needs to be thinking about. Because at the moment, the people who get the value out of that is the landowner, and the people who have the disbenefit are those of us who live in Derby. There are delays in spending that money, and as been mentioned, there is a deadline for getting that spending done in almost all cases. I think there is work that we need to do as a council to make sure that we are spending that money in a timely manner, whether it's in parks, whether it's in highways, or one of the challenges is for community centres, where it may be that we need to work with a management body for a community centre to actually spend money that is being given through Section 106.
Just on this point, Lucy, what are you suggesting is the bottleneck? Is it the council itself, or is it the councillors? Because in my experience, that sometimes councillors don't know what to do with them, Section 106.
I don't think it's up to councillors to decide. I think it's primarily an officer decision as to how that money is spent, and councillors should be enabled to feed into that process. So whether or not we've suggested anything, that money should be spent for the benefit of the people of Derby. If we want to guide the way that is spent, then we should be. My final point is about housing and money for affordable housing, and I think the direction to look at this is the majority of that money will be spent through Derby Homes and Derby Homes' programme of purchase or build of properties, mostly purchase recently. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, right, I'll try and... do you want to?
We're fighting over it now. The weekly list. I send a weekly list out every week of planning applications we've received. And I would say, members and all members who are watching, that is the time to get engaged with the planning process, because that's when we start. It comes through the front door, we go out to various consultations, and Rosie's team pick it up and start the negotiations on the heads of terms with the developer. So it's a twin track issue. And I'd much rather members get engaged at that process so that Rosie's team can pick up any member issues that you might have at that early stage, as opposed to waiting until the heads of terms have been agreed and we're at planning committee, and then we think we actually need to negotiate this and the heads of terms. It's a bit late then, because we've already been there with the developer. In terms of the land value price, Rosie will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure the district valuer works out the land value based on his land value. That's what the land value should be, not what you've paid for it. That's what it should be. That's what the price of that land is for Derby. If you pay too much, tough. I will still, as a district valuer, I will still assess it based on my pricing for that piece of land. So that doesn't really affect the Section 106. In terms of delays in spend, I must say I do not like giving money back to developers. So let's park that one. Delays in spend, that's why we monitor for the various departments. You've got this amount of money coming through for Section 106. Your deadline is X, usually 10 years in advance. And those individual departments are lumping together those bits of money to make one project and then moving on and paying for it. But we do regularly monitor with a monitoring report and push them to make sure that those schemes benefit the residents of Derby. Is there anything else?
I think Councillor Kerr's first point was around the flexibility that we have in terms of how we what we put in the Section 106 in terms of what we can spend the contributions on, which is a really fair point. We're a little bit hamstrung. So back in my years and years ago when I started doing this, we didn't have to be very specific, and the wording was really, it was just capable of serving the development site, which could mean anything. And then as sort of legislation has changed, we've had to be more specific. So we are required, particularly if a developer asks us to be very specific, we have to be. So we have to be able to, under the FIL regulations, we have to be able to justify everything we are asking for. So if we say we want a contribution towards a primary school, we have to say what that primary school is, or same with a piece of open space or a particular highway requirement. Now, we tend to try and build in as much flexibility as we can, because Councillor Kerr is right. We know that in 5 years' time, something might have changed, or we might not be able to do quite what we wanted to because of the money we've got, or various reasons. So we try and build in as much flexibility as we can, but we are a little bit hamstrung. We can't be completely flexible, unfortunately. But what we can do is go back and renegotiate with the developer at a later stage, which we've done many times before, and have dealer variations to change either the time for spend or what we're going to spend it on. I mean, that process itself does hold a few risks, because if the developer knows we're struggling to spend it within the bounds of the agreement, they could just refuse to do it and just wait out the time and ask for the money back. But we tend to have really good working relationships with a lot of the developers in Derby, and therefore we are usually quite successful in being able to do that. But there's always a risk, and we have to take a view on an individual one. Thank you. Brilliant,
thank you for that. Mr Webster and then Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. I mean, one of my points have just been raised by Councillor Kerr, but I'm interested in controls, and in particular, as has been mentioned already, contributions have to be repaid if they're not used within the time and within the parameters. So as I was going to ask, what sort of controls are in place to make sure that doesn't happen, and has it happened?
Unfortunately, occasionally over the years, we have paid back less than a handful of contributions. We work very closely with our finance colleagues, so there's constant dialogue in terms of what contributions we've got, what the timescales are. We have, with our, as well as our sort of quarterly reporting with councillors, we also have quarterly reporting with the departments as well, in terms of reminding them what contributions are available. We have a sort of traffic light system of highlighting ones where we've only got 2 years to spend, where we've only got a year to spend. So, and we've been through audit quite a few times over the years, and that's brought, you know, new changes and new, new procedures that we've put in place. So we do everything, I think we do everything we can to make sure that it doesn't happen. Very occasionally, for very specific reasons, it does happen. It hasn't happened for quite a few years. I think it's probably, oh God, I don't know, time goes by, but it must be 10 years plus. So yeah, it doesn't happen very often. Thanks.
Awesome. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, sorry, Sarah Bolton, Blakely's ward. I think to move this on and hopefully be helpful, particularly for councillors, and I don't think the mechanisms of Section 106 are particularly for this committee. We should perhaps put this on the agenda for councillors' training development evening, and just give a slot there to update councillors and give them an overview of what Section 106 is. I don't think, whilst it's an important subject, I don't think it's the overall control of this committee. I think we can perhaps give some guidance and have a discussion about it at one of our training events.
Paul.
As Councillor Bolton and Councillor Kerr know, I offer training sessions in advance of every planning committee meeting. So 5 till 10 to 6. I'm happy to do a special, and I've done them before. We did it on biodiversity net gain, I believe. So an online training session where we can talk about Section 106 and the nuts and bolts of Section 106, and for members understand. I would remind members there is a guide out there, a councillor guide, which we can send out again on the back of that invite, if you like, to all members. Here's the councillor guide. This is Section 106. And then we can talk it through, and a bit like today, but into much more detail if need be. I can put that on the agenda, that's fine.
Awesome, that'd be great. Cheers, Paul. Thank you.
Sorry, could I just add as well that, sorry, my team is always available. If any councillors have any questions, either sort of a general chat through what Section 106 means or more specific issues about your ward or a specific development, my team is always available for emails or phone calls. Rachel, as I say, Rachel Reid in particular does a lot of the monitoring and she's always willing to have a chat through.
Brilliant, thank you for that. The final point I think that I'll add, and it's something that you raised, Paul, a couple of questions ago, is around getting councillors engaged early. So as far as I'm aware, the planning report is released on a Friday afternoon, I think, is normally when I receive it. I always have a quick scan read of it, see what comes through. So my only ask of my fellow councillors is to go back to your colleagues and tell them to be a bit more proactive, give it a brief read on a Friday, and if they see something that catches their eye, to engage with Paul and Rosie's teams, and the sooner the better, I think.
Chair, through you, we send it out on a Friday so you can read it at your leisure on Saturday with your coffee.
Which is often when I do it. Awesome, I knew that would be a lively discussion. Any other questions? Are we happy to note the report and move on to item 8? Brilliant. Awesome, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, okay, so we're going to move on to item number 8, which is the contract waivers for the period the 1st of July 2023 to the 31st of December 2023. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Linda Spivey, Head of Procurement. People will be aware that we bring this report to Audit and Governance on a regular basis. The period, as you've stated, is for the final 12 months of the year 2023. At 4.1 is the breakdown of waivers that were processed during that period of time, broken down into directorates and classification. And then at 4.4 is the quarterly comparator. Pleased to say that the number of waivers remains low. Members of this committee that have been on it for a number of years will know it's exceedingly low in comparison to some of the reports I used to bring. And at Appendix 1 is the one avoidable waiver, the details of which we've printed out so that members are aware of what that item was. Happy to take any questions.
Awesome, thank you very much. Linda, do we have any questions? Yes, Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Chair. As a new member of the committee, if I can just have an explanation on the classifications, what's considered unavoidable and avoidable, what they are, and just to provide some context again for myself, how many procurements we have in that period, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The number of procurements, I will have to come back with that information because I don't know it off the top of my head, but I will bring that back to you. An unavoidable waiver is where we have to place urgent care placements or items that we couldn't possibly do a procurement process for, but we record the fact that we've contracted with that provider as in the form of a waiver. So that's what the unavoidable waivers are. Avoidable is where we've had to do something because lack of effort by whichever department, or even perhaps lack of resource within the procurement team to do a process. So we've direct awarded without doing a procurement process, and that's what avoidable means. Hope that helps.
Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I was just going to ask about this one that's, and I would say the numbers are looking far better than we've sometimes seen. And I think that's a sort of congratulations to everybody across the whole of the council, because it could be from any of those areas, anywhere. But this one that you've highlighted to us, say he is competitive in his rates. How do we know he is competitive in his rates? And is this an extension of the existing contract, or does it work out actually as a new contract, as sort of referenced at the end of the summary?
Yes, thank you. it's the service that have told us that these rates are competitive, because obviously they will be more aware of the market than the procurement team, who are we're process experts rather than market experts. So that's a comment from the department. I'm happy to get more information just to prove that. I'm happy to do that. We would do this as a new contract because otherwise we would go over the recommended length of contract that is laid down within the contract procedure rules. So this is a new separate contract, obviously for the period of time that it states on the report.
Thank you very much, Linda. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. Just a very quick one. Does Dublin City Council have a contract waiver procedure? And if so, can you point me in the direction so I can have a read of it?
The waiver procedure will be laid down in contract procedure rules. There'll be a section waivers there. They are currently being reviewed as part of the whole of the Constitution. But I'm happy to send via Dominic the current information, but obviously that might be subject to change.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Tony Dolman, Co-opted member. Just a quick question. Just to understand, we're giving oversight here on the avoidable ones, which is one. What oversight is there that the unavoidable ones are truly unavoidable? How do we keep an eye on that things aren't slipping through the gate?
I'll answer your second question first, if I may, because that's the easiest one to me. The classification of the waiver is checked by the procurement team when it's logged. Because we obviously do the reporting of it, we check the classification. So that's updated within the team that's processed against the rules. The form is online now, so you know there is a classification put in there, but it's all signed off by procurement. Usually myself, actually, at the end of the day, if that's what. So that the classifications are always checked. It's not the department, because they'd always put that they were unavoidable, so they don't get into trouble. I'm afraid I'm not quite clear what you're asking me on the first part of your question.
Awesome. Thank you for your question, Tony, and thank you for your answer. Linda, any other questions? We all good? Brilliant, thank you very much. Right, we will move on to item number 9, which is the CIPFA Financial Management Code update, which I think is this presentation that we're about to go through. Awesome, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Pete Shilcott, Group Accountant for Corporate Finance. The longest standing members of the committee will recall that we brought a report to this committee back in July 2022 about the implementation of FM code and our compliance with the code. This is very much an update on that report to members of the committee. I'm going to go through a presentation that we gave to CLT about a month ago and hopefully take any questions at the end. So the purpose of this presentation is to inform CLT and this committee of the FM code and raise awareness and seek updates, and obviously to demonstrate that we are complying with the code. Next slide, please. So the code itself basically introduces a framework built on existing practices, but it also introduces these standards of compliance that each council must adhere to be compliant with the code. Next slide, please. So, probably not very clear from that, but essentially you've got the Prudential Code for Capital Finance, the Treasury Management Code, and the SITFA Code of Practice. They're all existing, well-established codes of practice that all form part of the FM code compliance. So by complying with each one of those different codes, it helps then to overall comply with the FM code itself. Next slide, please. So complying with the standards, it's a collective responsibility of elected members, the Chief Finance Officer and the professional colleagues in the leadership team. So it's very much, it's not just a finance-driven thing, it's across the authority that we should be looking to demonstrate that we are compliant with this code. Next slide, please. So it's set around 6 principles of leadership, accountability, transparency, professional standards, assurance, recognised and long-term sustainability. So taking each one in turn, the first one's about demonstrating that obviously the organisation has clear leadership, it's got a strategic vision, and that financial management is clearly embedded into the processes of the organisation. Around accountability, it's around that the medium-term financial plan is robust, that it's based on quality data, and that pressures and savings that are in there are all robustly challenged and costed properly. Transparency is around obviously making sure that everything that we're doing is transparent and people, the public, members, officers, staff are all clear on decisions that are made around finances and that we're transparent in our decision making. Professional standards is around ensuring that the leadership team complies with professional standards across the board, not just professional standards in finance, whatever discipline it is, that we are adhering to those professional standards. Assurance is around this committee and the wider members getting assurance from external audit, internal audit, that controls are being adequately implemented. External audit are doing their role, albeit comments earlier, and that the members have got assurance that the finances are being managed well within the authority. And again, about long-term sustainability, obviously that's about making sure that the authority is not just in the short term, but in the long to medium term, as far as funding allows, that it's on a sound footing. Next slide, please. So underpinning that are a number of standards. There's 16 of them, and these are the minimum standards with which the council needs to comply to be compliant with the FM code. The standards, whilst they're mandatory, they're not prescribed by sort of how we achieve those standards. So what we've got is a document that has 74, next slide please, Dom, sorry. So what we have is a document that has 74 items of evidence, if you will, that demonstrate our compliance with the code, and each one of those items has been RAG rated. Now what I would say is the RAG rating has been very much driven by finance, but what we were looking for from CLT is for their buy-in to this as well, because obviously from a finance perspective there's that tendency to be a bit more cautious on things. So you'll see from that RAG rating, there's 3 that we consider red, 13 that are amber, 54 green. Now that doesn't mean that we believe we're not compliant, it just means that we've got a risk around those items of evidence. And the risk tends to coalesce around 3 things, and that's long-term funding, capacity within the organisation to continue to deliver services, given that the authority is reducing in numbers, and also around our ability in the longer term to continue to make significant savings. Obviously, we've made significant savings over the last few years, and if we have to keep making those at scale, we believe there's a risk around that. So that's very much where we've gone on the RAG rating. As I say, just emphasise again that it's not that we're not compliant, it's just that we consider there are risks around those particular areas. Now the document itself, there's quite a lengthy document that underpins this. We've not brought it to this committee because it's still in draft stage. The action plan needs signing off by CLT, and once we've done that, we would intend to bring that action plan back to the committee for your review. But it's really just giving you a flavour of what the FM code is and where we are in the process. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Do we have any questions? Are we all think it's quite clear, isn't it? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I thought what was interesting was the was the comments that the responsibility for this is threefold. It's obviously the finance team, but it's also the leadership, and it's ourselves as councillors as part of that leadership. And you've approached the corporate leadership team to try and get them to take a bit more ownership of some of these responsibilities. Have you got a message to councillors as to what additional responsibility you should be expecting from us? And as a body of councillors, do you think that not just ourselves, but do you think the wider body of councillors appreciate what you're asking?
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Yes. In terms of engagement on officers, I think we're in a really good place. We've got a really sound devolved accountability across the organisation, and that's been evidenced in a lot of the really difficult MTFP processes that we've been through. And I would say, you know, I've seen councils where it's wholly the finance function that is driving the financial sustainability of the councils, and the decisions of the 151 officer is sort of made independently, and I can sort of give some assurance that that's not the case here. CLT and the corporate leadership team, that is, through the finances, through the budget process, meet regularly every week actually when we're going through the MTFP and MTFS process. So it's a weekly engagement, and I as Section 151 do feel really supported with my colleagues across the organisation. In terms of the members, I would say that's good. We've got good engagement from the executive, so from Cabinet. CLT and Cabinet have numerous away days talking about lots of not just the MTFP, but also around the financial sustainability of the council and other issues. So I think the engagement with the executive is really good, and I think Richard will probably say the same for internal audit in terms of the exposure that the internal audit get across that cohort. I think on reflection, if we look at maybe some of the engagement of some of the executive scrutiny functions, they probably could be improved a little bit more. I think we probably have always been. I think it's difficult in terms of the timing of that engagement, particularly around the timing that we've got for the financial settlement. It doesn't allow for that long-term strategic planning where I think we probably could engage sort of scrutiny and other councillors at that point. So that I think there's probably a little bit of reflection around how that engagement could work across that wider cohort, but definitely around corporate leadership and the executive member function. I think we're probably in a really good place.
Any other comments from anybody else? Yes, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just picking up from that point, does the constitutional review address those issues that you've raised regarding scrutiny? Or have you fed into that?
I don't think I think the framework is there in the Constitution to allow for that. I think it's probably just around how we work that through and engage more. I don't think it's more that the Constitution is light on it. It's probably how we collectively think about practical ways that we can work on that engagement, really.
Yes, Philip.
Phil Sunderland, Co-op member. Pete, you talk about the detailed FM code basically coming through. What's the timescale for that, and is there any sort of training envisaged or anything like that, either for ordinary councillors or people like myself?
Yeah, so it was about a month ago, as I say, we engaged with CLT with that presentation. I think they've been engaged anyway, but formally with the presentation. So probably I would say the first quarter of 24-25, we would look to try and bring something back. Obviously, we've got accounts that we've got to prepare and get out of the way, so that's going to be the priority. But clearly we would want to bring something back to the committee to give you the assurance that, you know, we've not just left it, we are engaged and action plans in place. There is a draft action plan, as I say, it just needs to be signed off by CLT that they're happy with that.
Okay, brilliant. Anything from anybody else? Okie dokie, awesome. Right, we will move on to item number 10 then, which is the accounting policies for 2023-2024 by yourself, Peter. So over to you.
Okay, so this report seeking approval for the adoption of accounting policies for 23-24 for the accounts that we're about to prepare. The members will see from the report that we're actually proposing no changes to accounting policies for 23-24. However, I would draw your attention to 4.3, which talks about the long-standing infrastructure assets issue. We will again be taking advantage of the temporary disclosure amendments within the accounts. For members who are not familiar with this is an issue that's been rumbling on for 2 years. CIPFA are looking at putting in a permanent solution to this issue, but still not come up with that. So the temporary fix that they announced last year continues to be in the code for 23-24. And as I say, we'll be adopting that temporary disclosure. Essentially what it does is takes the need to disclose accumulated depreciation out of the accounts and then just make reference to it in some narrative and a little explanation, and that's essentially it. It doesn't alter the balance sheet, doesn't alter anything like that, it's just literally a disclosure amendment, but it's worth just pointing that out. The other thing, just to draw to members' attention, 4.4 talks about the implementation of IFRS 16, which is around leases. Now, that's been rumbling on for a number of years and has been put back, but that actually becomes a mandatory implementation from the 1st of April 2024. So we obviously will be adopting that as part of the 24-25 accounts. To give members some reassurance, we have got a working group with officers from procurement, legal, finance, and valuations and other people as we need them to look at implementing that during 24-25. So we've got it in hand. We know broadly what we're doing, but that's for the 24-25 accounts, not for 23-24. So that's just really to bring that to your attention, really. Again, happy to take any questions. That's it.
Brilliant. Do we have any questions for Peter? Yes, Philip.
Just picking up on that, on the leasing thing, you don't envisage that being a particular problem, because it is problematic in some authorities, I understand it. You don't envisage that being difficult to bring in.
I mean, in terms of existing leases, no, because I think we've got a good handle on our existing suite of leases. We'll make an assessment on those and make adjustments as we need to. The big thing with IFRS 16 is it expands the definition of what a lease is, and it's capturing those that's going to be the challenge as we move through 24-25. So to answer your question, it's difficult to say whether it's going to be a challenge or not. As I say, we've got a working group looking at it, and we will take steady progress as we're working through the year. But it will be a challenge, but I'm confident that we can deal with it.
Just one other thing on a couple of areas really I was looking at. Teachers' pensions and PFI schemes. Does this apply to all teachers working in the city, or is it just the teachers who are working in city schools? And PFI schemes where the schools have gone out to become academy, we are still responsible for the payments, as I understand it, because the City Council is a party to the agreement. Is that rechargeable to the organisation that's taken over the schools, or how does that work?
Well, I'll take the PFI one first. no is the answer to that. We don't recharge it to the schools. We're the contractor or part of the contract for the PFI, so we're responsible for those payments within that contract. So no, we don't recharge it to the schools. In terms of teachers' pensions, it's teachers who are part of that teachers' pension scheme within the city. Yeah. So if they're part of the teachers' pensions, then yes, that applies to those.
Mr. Dolman, yep.
Thank you. Two quick questions. No changes, that's really probably comforting. But it's quite a technical document, and perhaps not all accountants on this committee, although some have got more knowledge than others. Do our external auditors give the nod on this as well, that it's a robust framework? And if not, would that be useful? And the second question is probably a bit of a nod to the next agenda item, actually, that our terms of reference don't explicitly say that we should approve this. It might be sort of a nuance in there. Maybe come on to that one as part of the terms of reference agenda item, maybe.
So in answer to your first question, the accounting policies form part of the financial statements, so they are subject to external audit. I would defer to Leah if she wants to add anything to it, but yes, they will form part of that audit process. I mean, to add as part... We have in the past been asked to amend certain accounting policies or change the wording of certain accounting policies, particularly around going concern and during the COVID period. So yes, it is part of their audit process.
Okay, brilliant. Any other questions? We all good? So are we happy to approve the accounting policy? Can I have a... Thank you very much, Sarah. Seconder? John Wright, thank you very much. Happy days. Okay, cool. Let's move on then to item number 11, which is the committee terms of reference.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Bono. I'm the head of the CMAP Audit Partnership. Normally in the past, what we've done is have a working group from the committee of about 4 members. In the past, Councillor Kerr and Philip Sunderland have both been on this. This year I thought I'd try a different approach with a completely, well, other than Councillor Kerr and Philip, a new committee that would bring the whole terms of reference to the committee for them to have a look at, rather than have a working group that comes back and says this is what we've come up with. So if everyone gets an input. Committee terms of reference have always been based on the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy's guidelines. In the guidelines for audit committees, they produce a model terms of reference for audit committees. So we followed that, but we've added in things that, you know, as a committee, we wanted to have additional to that. From my point of view, I don't think, I feel that the current terms of reference are fit for purpose. I'm not aware of anything that I would add into it, but it's now down to the committee. And if the committee do want to change them, then we're going to have to put it back to full council in May for their approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Does anybody have any comments on the... yes, Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you. The vast majority of them seem as though they're items we've considered in the past, and they look pretty comprehensive. I've just got a couple of questions, really. Item 11 and item 14, that 11 is to consider compliance with its own and other published standards and controls. That sounds like it relates to everything that the council's got standards and controls over. So my question would be, like, for example, the Standards Committee itself, you know, isn't that the remit of the Standards Committee? I've never known things like that come to here, apart from financial standards and things like that. And secondly, the item 14, this seems to be a coverall. It basically covers all the work of the councils that is delegated, you know, or is not council responsibility. And to Councillor Bolton's point on Section 106, to me, this covers exactly Section 106 because it's delegated to officers to deliver the Section 106 policy. So just to clarify, because I mean, I felt I got an explanation from about Section 106, largely already known to me either through reading legislation or looking at the planning applications on a Friday afternoon and feeding back interest. But that's all information. It's nothing about changing it, which was where I was trying to get to. It's something I'll probably come back to this committee or through another route later. But this is my frustration with some of these issues. We're given information, but in changing anything seems very, very difficult to do. Whereas this element here does seem to give us the ability to basically challenge anything that the council does that is its statutory responsibility or delegated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Rich, you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think Councillor Wright is spot on with that. I mean, that's the idea of it. It comes under the governance section. What this committee should be doing, it's called Audit and Governance Committee. You're looking to get assurance on areas that you feel impact on the governance framework. So therefore, they are catch-all ones that allow you to do that.
Okay, cool. So are we all happy then with the... Oh, yes, Mr. Domin.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it all looks very sensible to me. It really does. I think for a new member, it might be useful to do a bit of a tick-off between what this says and when we've last done it. So I don't know, for example, when we last approved the whistleblowing policy here, as an example. Is it every year? Is it every 5 years? I can't, I'm not sure. Do we do everything that's in here, or are there anything that's missing? Or do we do more than we should? And I think it would be potentially useful to do that reconciliation between what's come here over the last couple of years versus what this says, and then we're sure that we're doing everything, and then we can challenge better.
Do you have anything to say to that, Richard?
Most of it's picked up as part of the annual report. The chair has to do an annual report each year to full council, stating how you've met your terms of reference. So that's how that's achieved. And with the whistleblowing, that was last approved by this committee in January 2023.
Right, okay, so are we happy with the terms of reference? Yeah, all nodding? Brilliant. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Right, let's move on then to item number 12, which is the Audit and Governance Committee Self-Assessment of Good Practice 2023-2024. Back over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we look at this on an annual basis. I brought you this in the January committee meeting and asked everyone to try and get everything back to me by the end of February. As you can see from the report, we've got 8 returns out of a possible 12. It wasn't an easy report to put together because a lot of the people had, not everyone was able to answer all the questions for a start, and also there were issues where we've got, should we say, asking 8 people their opinion, you end up with 8 different opinions on things, so it's quite diverse. So what I've tried to do is put it together as best I can. The key thing from this now is how committee want to take this forward. In the past, we've done like an action plan and taken that forward, and the committee look at it each meeting to see, how things are progressing. But I think the key thing here for the committee is to identify any areas they think are key to their effectiveness that aren't, compliant, shall we say, with the they've identified, sort of more major areas for weakness, etc. So they're the key ones, and then really how you want to take that forward.
Comments, anybody? Yes, Philip.
Just for again, just the obvious way forward is just to produce some sort of action plan saying what we're going to do, when we're going to do it by, and that seems the most straightforward way. I mean, as you say, some of the comments are made are probably only made by one person or 2 people, so it is difficult to understand. There is a certain lack of knowledge, and that lack of knowledge is not it's not a problem, it's because of lack of experience, I would suggest. And that was one of the difficulties of filling in the form, because if you didn't know the answer to the question, you couldn't tick any of the boxes. There wasn't a I don't know section. And I felt that if you're going to use a questionnaire like that, you really ought to have a don't know, because a lot of people, I would suggest, probably didn't know the answer to the question. It's probably why they didn't answer the question. So that's just my point of view, that.
Councillor Kerr.
I think an action plan would be a good idea, and I think there's going to be one that we should have on that list, and we can be ticking off very soon, which is, have we met with the external auditors? So thank you for the invitation, because that might be done fairly soon.
We've already ticked it off.
We can't tick it off yet. Not had a private meeting with them. But I would wonder if we could delegate back to Richard to highlight the things that he thinks that we've highlighted to him and how we might achieve it.
I'm happy with that. Is everybody else happy with that? Are you happy with that, Richard?
Something we can pick up, yes.
Brilliant. Awesome. Yes, Mr.
Yeah, just as an offer, if Richard wants not necessarily help, but any input as a small working group to help pull it together as somebody that's new, I'd be more than happy to offer that if it would be useful. No problem.
Awesome. Yes, Mr. Webster. Okay, brilliant. Oh, Richard, you've been inundated with helpers. This never happens.
Only small.
Oh dear. Okay, brilliant. So are we happy then for the recommendation to be an action plan, and then for Mr. Dolman and Mr. Webster to support Richard in creating that action plan? Yeah. Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you very much. Right, we will then move on to item number 13, which is the internal audit progress report. Over to you again, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't spend too long on this. I mean, you can see from the various tables in the actual appendix that, you know, how we're progressing. The one thing on the brought forward jobs is, you know, all bar one now have all reached final report. That one on the transparency code, it's not due to lack of the person that's receiving it just not coming back to us. And we're in constant dialogue on this. It's a difficult issue for them, and given the nature of the person that's got this recommendation, it is the monitoring officer, and they've got a lot on their plate at the moment. So, you know, it's one of those areas where, you know, we're working closely with them. The key thing is, though, the one recommendation there that they've got, the very first recommendation, really then dictates how they answer all the rest of the recommendations in there, because it's the problem we have with the transparency code is that there's no one overseeing what happens without them looking at, you know, how everything's published. And so it's getting that first step right, first of all, and then all the other recommendations will flow from that. So that's something we've got to get right. And also, this was, should we say, technical term, the transparency code audit was dumped on the monitoring officer when the strategic director of corporate resources left. So this is something she's had to pick up. But that's the only area of the brought forward ones that are still outstanding. We're making progress on a lot of the 23-24 jobs, but as we've reported through to committee, and how Kieran as chair is picking up the issues around, you know, people not coming back to us, people ignoring our stuff. So that's going to go out in the next few days. Alison and I are happy with the redraft of one of the ones he's done, and we're going with a slightly softer one. But the chair did want to have it in his own style, so we've adhered to that. The other key factor in here now is the audit coverage, which you'll see on page 6 of this report. There are a number of audits there. 4 are limited: residential care, management of school exclusions, compliance with statutory functions, assets and engineering, and climate change. So, and then you can see underneath that a synopsis of the areas of weakness and the recommendations that we've made and how progress is going on those. Again, if we get down to the recommendation side of things, the one thing I will point out to committee is that we no longer have any significant risk recommendations outstanding. The one around the crematorium has now been signed off. They have achieved the recommendation. That I'm not saying it's, you know, we're going to have a brand new cremator, etc. But what they've done is they've gone through to CLT, produced a business case. Alison, at the last meeting, when it was raised, said, you know, that yes, you know, there are issues around finance that they've got to sort out, and that's still the case. But from getting approval from CLT to look into it much further, they've achieved that, so we've taken that out now. So that was one of the key one of the key recommendations that have been hanging around for 2 or 3 years, should we say. So we've only got moderate risk recommendations there, and they're all highlighted there. Still a couple where we've not got responses, one being the CCTV access control public protection. I mean, we're happy to sign it off. They say it's been implemented, but we do want to see this revised CCTV policy before we sign it off. So that's one on those. And the other one that's past its date is around the hospital to home protection of property one. That should have been done by the 29th of the month. We've not had anything back on that one. Again, it's only a couple of weeks, so we are chasing that one. So hopefully there's nothing there other than those that have passed their revised action dates that I would want to flag with you. The only other thing in the report, of course, is the Quality Assurance and Improvement Plan. As you can see there, we are concentrating mostly on the audit management system, which we hope to have in place, well, will be in place on the 1st of April. It won't be fully embedded by then, and we've still got a lot of work to do on it. But so 24-25 will be an interesting year. We'll be parallel running with the old system, and we will have a new action coming in, action number 8 for 24-25's one, around the new internal auditing standards for internal audit. Now, what we're not sure yet there is exactly what the impact is going to be on the public sector. Last time, CIPFA produced what was called the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, is what we adhere to, and that's what we're monitored against on our five-yearly external quality assessment, which we reported through to committee November 2022, I think it was. You know, that we'd achieved that and we conformed in all areas. That's all I've got to say on the progress report, but open to any questions.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Richard. Just a quick something from me is just to note that I actually quite like how the report's set out. I do. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Dolman.
Thank you. Probably not really Richard, actually, probably more the recipient of the report, but I'll have to ask Richard because he's the one that's sitting here. Sorry, Richard. On management of school exclusions, which you got the detail in, and it was limited assurance, I was just intrigued that sort of over 60% of your recommendations had been knocked back by the business owner or not accepted. And I just sort of would like to almost ask that leader, or if Richard's got some insight, are we happy that on a limited audit, over 60% of recommendations are not going to be followed through? I just found that slightly concerning. That was question 1, so I'll just stop there for a second.
With your agreement, Chair, I'll hand over to Hannah MacDonald, who's the Group Auditor, who looks after the People's Department.
Over to you, Hannah.
Yeah, so the general message that we got back from the service area was that the frequency with which some of these issues would arise didn't really warrant the input of resources in their area. So that was the kind of the general message that we got.
And are we comfortable with that? So it's a limited assurance. So if Richard was to do this audit again, would it still be limited?
We would still most likely give it limited assurance, and we'd give them the opportunity to, at that point, to see whether they wanted to reconsider that position. We wouldn't ever tell them that these weren't issues, but obviously it is down to the service area to decide where they want to put their resources into addressing these particular issues we've identified.
Okay. I guess that's for us to sort of ponder. The second question was on the residential care one, where the 2 significant risks that were quoted, again on a limited report, have an action date of a year from now. And that was another challenge that I would throw in, why we got to wait a year for significant risk on a limited assurance report to be completed.
One of the things that's happened within the council is that where residential care has moved from under social care now into business support, and there's a lot of work going on around this from the head of business support and her team. So they've asked for a bit more time for them because they've got a lot of work on, certainly around debt management and all that, and also trying to bring in AI around debt management as well. So yes, it's a significant risk, but I'd rather them be looking at it than knocking us back on these things. So you know, I don't want them rushing these things. Yes, they've got priorities. As far as we're concerned, you know, they've accepted the risk and they are doing the work around it, and we will be monitoring what they're doing, and they'll be knowing the head of business support well. She will come back to us and she'll keep us informed.
So it was Mr Webster, then it was Councillor Kerr, and then it was Mr Sunderland.
Thank you. Thank you. I have sort of two questions. One is obviously I'm still concerned about the number of outstanding recommendations, the ones that are due and the ones that are being implemented but late. I understand the letters going out, as Richard has said very shortly. I just wanted to ask about what actions take place after that. Once that letter's been sent out and the managers are aware of the need to complete the recommendations, what happens if they don't? Are they then brought to this committee, or is there an action plan, or is there something that's in the letter perhaps that says what happens next? My second question is about assurance mapping. I see in the plan there was an item on assurance mapping which says 25% completed, but it's also raised in the quality assurance improvement plan, where it says a consultancy piece of work on assurance mapping has been assigned to Derby CC, but is on hold due to lack of engagement. I wonder if Richard could comment on that as well.
I can pick up both of those, Chair. On the first one, what happens is the audit section will send out emails to the various managers around recommendations when it's due, and we follow those up. We've also got a quarterly process where we send out to directors and heads of service a list in their areas of all the outstanding recommendations. I also go on a quarterly basis along to CLT to give an update on internal audit, and the progress with recommendations is one of those. And the committee will remember that Chief Executive Paul Simpson has been here before to state his support for this, and he has been driving it home with both his directors and the heads of service to get responses through to audit and to get these recommendations implemented. And it's something he takes very seriously as well. And of course, as been mentioned, Councillor Morgan McGeehan's going to send out that letter to speed up. It's getting the engagement from people. Some people are very good. We always have pockets of, and we've had it for a number of years, where people see the stuff coming in from internal audit on chasing up recommendations and just ignore it. But we're now trying to get the directors on board to get their help as well to move these things on. So that's where we are with that. That's how we follow all that up, and that's the sort of the escalation process. It does go right to the top. And of course, then there's also the opportunity for Audit and Governance Committee to call people in if they're not happy and question them as to why. And it has happened in the past as to why they haven't implemented these recommendations. What is the delay, etc. So, could you remind me what the other one was?
It was assurance mapping.
Assurance mapping. Thank you, David. Yeah. This is one of the areas where we are struggling to get cooperation, mainly because the people that are doing this are heavily involved in a number of areas and get pulled into a lot of external sort of inspections. So again, it's fitting it in, and it's one of those areas where we try to fit it in with them, but it's difficult. They've got other priorities. And of course, assurance mapping for Derby City Council is going to be an enormous exercise, hence why we're not rushing into this, but it's, again, we just need the cooperation, so we can't move it forward until we get that cooperation.
Philip, do you have a question?
Just a quick thing, really. I'm linking to our new external auditors. Presumably, at some stage, they will be commenting on the viability of what they think about internal audit and the planning and the detail things. So, I mean, So we'll get some comeback from them at some stage, I assume. Is that right?
So we wouldn't like comment on internal audits plan. We'll liaise with them and sort of see what they would be looking at, but we wouldn't sort of comment on what they are doing. And if they're saying, so if something came out of their report in regards to sort of financial system controls, we would do our own work on top of that as well. We wouldn't rely on sort of what they are coming back with.
You would rely on them to a certain extent. If you're satisfied with that they've done a proper professional job, and you wouldn't repeat that, you'll be building on that presumably.
We would build on it, but we aren't allowed to rely on the work of internal auditors.
Yeah, I think you've got to do your own due diligence, don't you? Yeah. Right. Anything from anybody else? Are we all good? Happy to move on? Brilliant. Awesome. Okie dokie. Right. So, item 14, the internal audit plan 24-25 quarter one. Back over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, following on from, we're still planning on a quarterly basis. It works much better, and I think committee have said for a number of years, for the last couple of years anyway, that they prefer it this way. From my point of view, I prefer it this way. Yes, it's sometimes easier just to bring an annual report to committee and get it approved at the very beginning. The danger is in an organisation like Derby City Council, risks change a lot. And I'll be constantly coming back to you saying, we've got to take this out of the plan and put this in. So doing it on a quarterly basis is a lot easier from my point of view. One of the things, I mean, I reported the beginning of 23-24 was that Derby's cut its contribution to CMAP. Therefore, we've had to cut our days accordingly. So we haven't got as much work. The key thing from my point of view is that the work that we can do enables me to provide an annual audit opinion, which I'll be bringing the 23-24 one to this committee in the June meeting. So as long as I've got, I'm confident that that can happen, then that's meeting my obligation. Our plan work is around that, is to enable me to provide that opinion. However, we are getting a lot of requests from Derby now to do more consultancy work, to sit on groups, as you can see from the plan. You know, we've been asked to sit on the Assurance and Development Group for social care. I've been asked, and one of my auditors has been asked to sit on the groups around artificial intelligence and that type of thing. I'm sitting on the compliance group. So again, we can get assurance from sitting there. Although we don't want to become part of the system, I know Councillor Care's flagged this one up before with around fraud and stuff like that. You know, if you, as head of audit, Richard Bonham, write the fraud strategy and all that type of stuff, how can you independently come back to us and give us assurance? So there's these type of things we've got to be very, very careful of. So we need to make sure that we are at an arm's length. We sit in on these groups, we can get assurance, we can listen to what they're saying. So that helps somewhat. So the coverage this year will be about 200 odd days lower than it was in, say, 2022, 23. But, you know, again, we're targeting areas that we know about. Hannah and Martin and the group auditors will go out and they'll meet with directors as well and talk to them about, you know, areas that keep them awake at night, but got to be relevant, of course, to our audit. So basically, we're getting their flavour as well. We talk to heads of service and get their understanding of things, then try to build everything in. We look at risk registers. I'm always also looking at the emerging risk log as well to see what else is coming through, to see what else we need to put on there. So we tend to do a bit more work around people's services. People's services has been one of those areas, historically, we haven't done a great deal of work on over the years. But in the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot more work around that area and slightly less in place and slightly... So we used to have overkill in what was corporate resources and now chief exec. So, you know, by meeting with Alison and Emily as monitoring officer and Paul as chief exec as well, through various groups and stuff, I can get assurance there, you know, that they've got an oversight of what's going on as well. So, from my point of view, the plan we're putting before you with all the indicative ones for quarters 2, 3 and 4 as well gives me confidence that I will be able to provide an audit opinion at the end of the 24-25 year. Things may change and we will report those through to you when we bring the next quarterly reports through.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, it's just quick. In relation to the artificial intelligence internal audit, the AI compliance group remit will be, I would anticipate, very close to sort of the remit of an internal audit, i.e., compliance with legislation, a whole range of issues there. Whereas the AI management workstream, I imagine, is more to do with the rollout of an AI project within that, within income management. So the question is, what do you intend doing in relation to the work of AI and compliance over and above what that group would be doing, or haven't you had a chance to think about that yet?
Your last comment was spot on. I haven't really had a lot of, I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago that we were asked to put beyond these groups. We want to do, I mean, clearly it's going to be driving the savings for the council. Clearly it's the biggest risk for the council. So, although Andy Bramwell might say, no, it's not the biggest risk, cyber is the biggest risk. But again, it's a key risk for the council. So, as well as sitting on these groups, we'll be looking to do other work around AI. But again, what I want to do is get on these groups and see what's happening. And then, I mean, one of the other big areas that we're not sitting on at the moment is around the social care. So we want to do some audit around that area.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. One of the items I expected to see on here, and maybe it's been given a different title, was to look at how blue badge is going on later in this year. There's some good news coming out of there because things are speeding up, but I don't want that to be speeding up and not going right in some other way. So is it there?
It's not, Councillor Kerr. It's one of those areas that I'm watching. It's on my list of areas that I'm watching at the moment. It's one we've done in the past. If I feel that it's something that we need to get involved in, then it will come in into quarters 2, 3 or 4.
Okay, thank you for that. Richard, any other questions from anybody else? Right, okay. Happy days. We'll move on to the second to last item, the penultimate one. Item 15, the internal audit charter. Back over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, this is an item I just bring to you on an annual basis. We've got an internal audit charter for Central Midlands Audit Partnership, which we take out to all of the partners. The Derby one is slightly different in that we haven't got an annual plan, we've got a quarterly plan. So what this does is each year just lays out what our purpose, authority and responsibility is. But we have to, under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, bring it to each individual audit committee to get their approval of it. So that's why it's before you now.
Any questions? Absolute silence. Fantastic. It was that good, Richard. There's nothing to say on it. Okay, fantastic. We'll move on to the last item then. So item number 16, Audit and Governance Committee, updated committee work programme 2023-2024. Over to you again, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, this is just really just to update committee on what's happened and why certain reports haven't come to this meeting. Yes, there was a lot of items on the agenda. Two of them, the partnership governance and external regulators, which were due. Again, it was Heather Green came to us and asked if we could defer these. Dom contacted the chair, who agreed to that because of the work they're under at the moment with various inspections, etc. And they're also working on the East Midlands Combined County Authority as well. And the other one is to say about the risk-based verification policy and why that's not on here this year. And I've outlined that in paragraph 4.4. It's not a mandatory scheme. The council have followed it before. Because it's a voluntary scheme, the council have now decided that they don't wish to follow it anymore. And a number of authorities are going down that route as well.
Do we have any questions for Richard on item 16? Are we all good? So are we happy to agree the updated work programme for the committee based on appendices 1? Okay, brilliant. Right, well, that brings us to the end. So thank you very much for attending the Audit and Governance Committee today.